The other thing is, Nkechi does not teach yoga. She practices yoga privately. She teaches meditation.
I said that.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay,
Yeah.
okay. That's what I had said to you. She teaches
Oh
yoga.
yeah. No, but I told you we're gonna do. And I think like you said, you struggle with anxiety. Oh my kids put in more anxious.
We spend part of the time down in UCLA, and we're now going to be spending part of the time if we live in Seattle, but we live most of the time in London. Where are you now?
We actually split time between.
Okay, can I ask everybody to take their seats? Can I ask everybody to quietly take their seats so you can hear the latest and the greatest information from the latest and greatest experts who have come here to tell you the latest and the greatest. So everybody could take a seat. That would be awesome. We're going to be streaming this conversation on Facebook and Instagram, where we've had on all of these discussions, 30, 40,000 people have joined us. So we like to start on time. So if everybody could take their seats. Okay. Sandy Gleistein, will you let me know when we're ready to begin? If everybody could take their seats. Carol Middleton, thank you so much for your support. First person with Carol Middleton. First person. As my son says, the first person is more important than the leader. That's because if there's not a first person, there's no movement. First person. Okay. Everybody take their seats. That would be super helpful. Okay, before we stream our conversation, Sandy Gleistein, who's the producer, is going to announce the winners.
Hey guys, I hope the workout was fun. I just wanted to say we are here for fundraising purposes, and you guys did a fantastic job, San Francisco. Thank you. The number 3, and by the way, you're all getting really great prizes. The next 3 names that I'm going to mention, we just didn't have the capacity to bring them up, but they're being shipped to you. So hang tight. Number 3 with Kathleen McIntosh. Are you here? Woo! $1,682. Shannon Smith, are you here? What? Shannon Smith. Is Shannon here today? Where? Okay, $2,310. So yay, Shannon! And then, as you heard, Carol Middleton with a whopping $11,230. So thank you, Carol Middleton. And now we're ready to go.
Okay, so tell me when we're ready. If everybody, we're going to feed you, I promise, afterwards. But this is intermittent fasting, so we're doing you a favor. Right? Right. Ketosis is happening in your brain. You're hopefully thinking clearer. Your brain is pumping blood. Okay, there is a monitor in the back for the people that are standing. You can watch the monitor, which isn't as good as watching us, but you can watch the monitor. Okay, we're live. Ha. Anyway, good Sunday morning to all of our friends who are joining us online. We've had thousands and thousands of people at these conversations in New York and Boston and Los Angeles, which is really great because our goal is to try to educate as many people as possible, empower them with the latest and greatest information, and then ideally ignite you to go out and repeat this information to people that you think might be interested in it. And even if they're not, tell them anyway, because they should be. So anyway, I want to introduce Dale Bredesen. Dale is here at the Buck Institute, also at UCLA. Don't worry, I'll get it. And has written a book, a big best-selling book called The End of Alzheimer's, and is teaching doctors across the country, primary care doctors, functional medicine doctors, about how to spot people with cognitive impairment, and then obviously how to help them. That I hear all the time is my doctor can't help me. So Dale is going to talk to us about how we can help everybody. Lily Sarafan here is the head of home care assistance. Lily has been our partner in this from the very beginning. We're giving out 100 caregiver relief grants because of her. So I want you to really, as we have mentioned, 15 million unpaid caregivers just with this disease alone, not to mention all the millions of other caregivers for all sorts of other issues going on in families across this country. 2/3 of the caregivers are women who are also working, and caregivers often put their own health on the back burner to care for somebody with Alzheimer's, and we're going to give them relief grants because what they need is time off. If you could be quiet in the back, I'm going to use my indoor nice voice to ask you to be quiet, and then I'm going to turn into something else. So, which isn't pleasant, and people have seen it, so don't bring it on. I'm only kidding. Sharon Sha is from Stanford and has done some really exciting research on the brain and has also seen patients and will bring us up to date about that. And also on the far end, Bruce Miller, who from UCSF was going to join us, who has been a partner, and he got sick this morning, so he's unfortunately not going to be here. And Nkechi over here, did I pronounce it? Nkechi, I was practicing it all morning. Nkechi, who has a program called City Matters, is going to talk to us about anxiety, meditation, and the importance of meditation and what it does for the brain. So let me begin. So thank you all for joining us today. And if these conversations, as I say, interest you, there have been others, so please share them off of Facebook. The Women's Alzheimer's Movement has them all in totality, and so they've been different at each location. So Dale, tell us, so many people think the Alzheimer's space is hopeless. We hear about all these trials that fail and fail and fail, and we hear every 65 seconds a new brain is being diagnosed, and people feel somewhat hopeless. I say there is hope. You're seeing it on the ground. What can you tell us today that you couldn't have told us a year ago?
Yeah, what I can tell you today, let's see if this is, can you hear me okay? There we go. What I can tell you today that I couldn't tell you a year ago is that Alzheimer's disease has moved out of the clinic. Alzheimer's disease is now part of our lives, and in fact there was a very interesting paper published recently in which pathologists looked for the earliest changes in the brain that are on the way to Alzheimer's disease. And what they were finding is that they were seeing this in children. So what we used to think of as a disease that's of the 70-plus people, that you go to a clinic, that you get a drug, and that there's no hope, has changed completely into something where you have to think about this your whole lives, and what you're doing today is helping everybody. Secondly, it's a lifelong process. So how many people here know they're fasting insulin? Okay, a couple of people. How many know their ApoE status? Okay, a number of people here. There are 75 million Americans who have a single copy of ApoE4, which puts them at increased risk, and there are 7 million Americans who have 2 copies, which unfortunately suggests that they will likely get Alzheimer's within their lifetimes. How many people here know their C4A? Okay, so this and a number of other things, critical to know. So we now know that this is something that is occurring for a long period of time, and we've
Just
known
repeat
for a
that,
while.
would you please? Because one of the other conversations we were saying that people need to know their blood pressure. they need
Right,
to
blood
know
pressure.
their cholesterol. This is as important as knowing like how many followers you have or how many likes. No, seriously, because that's what everybody's focused on, their likes and their followers. I'd like to get you, if you could just leave here with one thing, is knowing you're fasting. Tell them 3 things that they should know in addition to how many followers they have.
Yeah, so it's helpful to know your fasting insulin. It's helpful to know something called your HSCRP. And it's helpful to know your vitamin D. And there are about 35 things that we suggest that people know, but those are 3 that are helpful to know because they all play into something where we understand now that there are subtypes when people actually develop Alzheimer's. As we've been studying this in the lab for 30 years, we can see that there are people who have mainly an inflammatory process that leads to this thing we call Alzheimer's disease. But of course, we know it's coming for many years ahead of time. There are people who have this because they don't have the support for their brains. That's what we call type 2. There are people who have this because they have insulin resistance because of the American lifestyle. So it turns out it actually is really important what you eat. How many people here know if they have a leaky gut? That turns out to be really important because it's a contributor to inflammation. So the reality is we should be able to make this a rare disease.
So if we could cut the music, that would be like really helpful. Sandy or anybody, if we have music going, that would be helpful if we could just tone that down if possible. So, Pam was talking earlier about going to her doctor, about telling people that she was having issues with memory. And doctors were telling her there was nothing wrong with her. People tell you you're stressed out, don't worry about it. And you talk about leaky gut, knowing these numbers. So many people say, I go to my doctor, Sharon, and they don't know anything, which is why you need to know. But when you know, what do you tell your doctor? How do you get help out there? Because the brain begins to change at the age of 30, right? So how do people begin to get their doctors to think about their brains?
It's really hi, hello everyone. It's really important to think about what's changing in your brain. And if you feel like there's a change in your brain, it's not just yourself who might notice these things, and the brain is so remarkable that we may not be able to have the insight or the recognition of the changes that occur. So it's helpful to have, when you see a doctor, the neurologist, the primary care doctor, to bring a family member, a friend who knows you very well, to understand the changes, to reflect those changes as well. I often do neuropsychological testing in the clinic, so that we can really see if there's objective changes as well. Is there a functional change? Do people have problems with doing their day-to-day business? And then what we need to look for things that can be fixed and treated. So are there sleep problems? Are there anxiety? And I rarely think that it's just anxiety that's causing cognitive problems. That may be a component of Alzheimer's disease. So we have to look for those things. Sleep apnea, are there problems with your thyroid, your B12, things that can be fixed. And then, as we are doing every day, working on ways to slow things down. So there's so much more evidence that we've learned in the past year and the past several years about how exercise, what we've done today, can really help enhance cognitive function. There have been several studies at how it enhances memory for people who don't have cognitive problems. For people who do, it can slow down the process. So I'm really hopeful about what we've discovered in science in the past 6 months to a year, partnerships, not with just pharmaceutical companies, but with industry, academia, private foundations to support the research for finally a disease-modifying therapy. I'm very excited about what's on the horizon. So you said people are kind of hopeless. I'm very hopeful about what we can discover.
And I think also something that Dale had talked about originally, that it's not going to be one, everybody comes up to me all the time and say, are they going to get a cure? Is there a pill? And it's not going to be one thing, right? It's very often, it's insulin resistance. Very often, maybe somebody thinks they have cognitive impairment and they really have sleep issues. Sometimes people think they have cognitive impairment and they have a lot of anxiety, and they don't know these basic things that you were talking about. You did a study that I thought was fascinating where you injected the blood of a young mouse into an older mouse, and that changed the older mouse. And there's a lot of biohacking up here. We talk about intermittent fasting, people fasting for a whole day, intermittent fasting, taking all kinds of stuff to improve their cognitive impairment. Do you advise that? Is that like smart?
Yeah, so very good question. So I'll first talk about the work of Tony Weiss-Correa, one of my colleagues who did this young blood study. So he did what sounds very Frankensteinish. He connected the circulatory systems of young mice and old mice, so they shared the same blood. And what he found was that old mice who got the young blood had improved memory. And in their brains, there was synaptogenesis, so there's sprouting of these brain cells. So as we see that mice age and they might have changes in memory, we thought we can get young blood for other reasons. So I ran a study where we gave young plasma to people with Alzheimer's disease to see if it was safe. You start off with a small trial to make sure that people are safe and tolerating this, and it was safe. But what we were surprised by was that there was statistically significant improvement in functional abilities. So one of the hallmarks of Alzheimer's disease is that people have less independence. And so what we found is that these patients who got the young blood had improved independence, which was amazing. So it was a very small study. And so what I say, we don't say, okay, let's all get young blood. You know, we kind of feel like, oh, that might be exciting. But we have to start off small and do rigorous scientific studies. So we have to be blinded to the procedure. The patients have to be blinded to what they're getting. And it needs to be large enough to have a statistically significant response to prove that it's helping. So when we talk about biohacking and what's proven, I want to give people hope. I want to say, okay, you know, if you want to try this supplement, if you want to try intermittent fasting, number one, is it harmful to you? You know, is a small amount of fasting helpful? Maybe. But we want to make sure we're not harming ourselves, and that could be your wallet if it's too expensive, we're spending too much money. But I want to make sure if I'm going to recommend something to my patients, that it is proven scientifically. And if it's not proven, but we're not sure if it's harmful, but it potentially has benefit, then I say, okay, go ahead and try it, but let's make sure that it's safe.
You brought up anxiety, and Nkechi, I know you have spoken openly about struggling with that, found meditation to be very helpful. I find that, you know, I have 4 kids in their 20s, and all their friends, they're more anxious than I've ever seen any generation ever. And I might say that I talk to a lot of women my age and stuff who are anxious about their kids being anxious, and anxious about them being anxious, and anxious about their health, and anxious that they're going to get Alzheimer's. And so we do know that meditation helps with anxiety. How did that help for you, and what is the science that gets you excited about what meditation can do for the brain and the body and the central nervous system?
Is this on? Oh, yes, it is. Hi, everyone. Yeah, so I, too, struggled with anxiety growing up. It actually started probably around age 16, and then it led me to actually study the brain. I thought if I could figure out what was going on, then I could understand my anxiety. And long story short, found myself doing research in bringing meditation and mindfulness to different clinical populations, and that included depression, anxiety, and chronic pain and addiction. And basically, what excites me about meditation is that it really does slow down your nervous system and your parasympathetic nervous system, and trains the body to be in a place of response versus reaction. And all this is to say that when we're more present with ourselves and what's actually happening, there's a better way that we can be in the moment. And so that's what I teach now. Mindfulness is presence and being in the moment.
But to so many young people who are all trying to be the next Mark Zuckerberg, who, you know, and my son's like, I don't have time to teach me the meditation, I don't have time, like, can you do it to me in a minute? I'm like, no, that's the whole point why you need meditation. So
Yeah.
what do we, and the younger, obviously, you can start this, obviously, the better. So you're here in San Francisco dealing with a lot of people who are in the startup culture, working 24/7, as I hear all the time. How do you advise somebody or encourage them that they can start?
Yeah, it's funny what you're saying, because I do a lot of corporate meditation in tech companies. And the thing is that you can't really hack meditation. Like, you just kind of have to do it and sit and be with yourself. It's not like a quick fix. But I think the important part of how it relates to anxiety is that we're usually anxious about things that are causing us stress, and we haven't quite figured out a way to deal with it. And I think stress is degenerative. And so if there's anything that I learned in my research and in my practice and in working with different clients, is that when we mitigate stress, we actually are improving our bodies and our ability to be with people and ourselves. And so that's like the first thing. So like not having time, it's like really, well, if you make time for meditation, you'll actually start to see what doesn't need to, what you don't need to be focusing your energy on. So it's really helps with prioritizing.
Speaking of stress, the role of caregiver is probably one of the most stressful roles in the country, and people like Bob and others who are experiencing caregiving. I'm just doing a story for the Today Show that's coming out in a week or so about the millions of millennials who are now finding themselves caregivers, having to drop out of their careers to take care of their parents. And the economic hardship, the physical, emotional, spiritual hardship. What are you seeing, Lily, out on the front lines today that you didn't see a year or 2, 3 years ago?
Thanks, Maria. Well, first I want to start by saying that I think that, as the fellow panelists have shared, the story of neurocognitive health right now is a story of hope. Everyone living in the Bay Area is a stone's throw away from the Buck Institute, from Stanford, from UCSF, where all of these pioneers are creating a change. The thing that I'm most excited about is the shift in our national conversation from genetics to epigenetics. What are we doing through our lifestyle factors and wellness to impact our gene expression? And that relates a lot to caregiving. Like Maria mentioned, 15 million individuals in the United States are caring for a loved one with Alzheimer's. 1 in 4 American adults is caring for an aging loved one in general. But those caring for a loved one with Alzheimer's are 7 times more likely to experience symptoms of physical and cognitive health issues. And so it's really critical, the advice we're hearing here, it's not just about treating perhaps the 85-year-old patient, it's about their adult children who are spending 20 hours a week or more caring for their aging loved ones at the expense of their own health and wellness.
So what do people do? Because people come up to me all the time, people in their 20s, their 30s, their 40s, who are trying to find a caregiver, trying to know how to find an educated caregiver. How do they afford a caregiver? How long can they keep a loved one in their home? What is the advice you want to give to people about caregiving?
Sure. So home care assistants, we're the leading provider of in-home care across the country for seniors. And what we really share is we want to be a partner to the family caregivers who are doing this work. We're providing a lot of educational resources. We've published 7 books, all sorts of pamphlets. You can walk into our offices and speak at no cost with any of our care managers about what you can do to augment the caregiving that you're already providing at home. But if you need additional help, I'm here to tell you that those resources are out there. Our organization, as well as others, helps you by providing professional care for your loved one, because often it's very stressful to go through that role reversal and go from being the adult daughter to being the full-time caregiver. And so I would say to take advantage of those resources that are out there. And like Maria mentioned, we've made available caregiver recharge grants. So if you go to homecareassistance.com/women's Alzheimer's movement, you can apply for yourself or for a family member or friend for a couple of days off from caregiving to attend to your own health and wellness, to do meditation, to attend a nutritional conference, to meet with your own doctor, to go to some sort of retreat. And I think that that's really critical for the health and wellness of our country. We're adding a lot of years of lifespan, but it's just as important that we focus on the health span of the generation that's providing care.
And this is a really important thing, what we have found in all of these events that we have done around the country. What you're learning today, the way you exercise today, which was not only good for your physical body, but also your cognitive health, meditation, right? Supplements, knowing your A1C, knowing these things, they're really non-negotiables. You can't think about, I'm going to get to that when I'm 70, when I'm my age. This is something your kids need to know, your kids need to do, and you need to do when you go out from here today. It's not like I'll get to it later, because your brain is changing and you're going to either lose it or you're going to use it. And so every day actually counts and every day matters. And Dale, you've been really kind of progressive in this space, because when I started working with you and having you on my conversations, people are like, whoa, Dale is out there. And I was like, well, and it's true, they're like, do you know? And, but you've really had a lot of tremendous success with your protocol. And you were the first one that kind of talked to me about the brain being like a roof with a lot of leaks in it. Right. And that it's not going to be one thing and you're going to be fine. And so the brain is so complex that people, I think, have a hard time making friends with it, understanding it, or even understand the concept of how do you keep it in shape. and the fear of like, when I can't remember something, I'm doomed.
Right. So, this is, as we said earlier, this is now expanding, and you're absolutely right. So I, as a lifelong scientist and academician, I've had to become an activist. I did not start out to be a hated activist, out there person.
Yeah.
But what I found is, in fact, when you look at the truth, when you look at what's come out of the test tube in the last 30 years, what it says is that the disease that we call Alzheimer's is not what we thought it was. And in fact, global cognition and cognition for our lives is critical. And as you said, what we found is that there are 36 different contributory mechanisms. We know of about a few more now. If you look at what a single drug can do, a drug can do one or two things. It can't do all the different things we'd like it to. So in fact, we do have to look at additional things. What you eat is important. Whether you have a leaky gut is important. Whether
How does
you
someone know if
exercise-
they have a leaky gut?
There are a couple ways to do it. Excuse me, there's a simple test called a Cyrex-2 array. That's one way to go, but there are others.
They ask their doctor for
go
that?
Go to your doctor and say, do I have a leaky gut? And especially if you have gut symptoms. And so, you're absolutely right. And it's one of the reasons that so many of us have it and don't know it. Find out if you are sensitive to certain things. And in fact, it is a very common problem, and it is one that contributes to everything from inflammatory bowel disease to rheumatoid arthritis to lupus to cognitive decline.
And so many of those things you just mentioned are dominant with women. And what we have also learned in this past year, and some of it coming from the Women's Alzheimer's Movement grants, is that the brain of a middle-aged woman is very different than the brain of a middle-aged man. And that a woman who is perimenopausal, and menopausal, the change in a woman's brain is dramatic, even alarming. So what can you tell women who are out there who are, let's just say they have not experienced menopause, they're not even perimenopausal, and what hope can you give to those who are menopausal?
So,
It's really serious, I'm not kidding, because women are used to being called crazy, out of control, all of these things.
Yeah.
And that's a joke because it's serious brain changes that is causing you to feel that way. So
Right.
I always say if somebody says like, my kid, yeah, you're crazy, I'll take them by the neck. You want to say crazy? No, but it's a real serious, that is real neurological changes going on.
yeah, this is so important. And I think that, again, I've been doing this research for 30 years. I've never been so enthusiastic that there is so much to do. And in fact, we can all together reduce the global burden of dementia. So if you are in perimenopause or in menopause or in pre-perimenopause, and you are noticing changes, don't just simply ascribe, oh yeah, this is just the normal thing, I'm going through the change. Talk to your doctor, talk to your other healthcare providers, nurses, what have you. And if they don't listen to you, you've got the wrong doctor. So you want to tell them the truth. Tell them what's actually going on. And by the way, there are many good ways to document changes now. CNS vital signs, cog state. There are many, many ways to look at your cognition. And of course, mood and anxiety. These are all part of this. So again, be heard.
And be believed.
Yes.
So a big part of also for women, hormonal changes. So many women that I've come up to and questions that have come through here is the role of estrogen as a neuroprotector versus the decision that it could increase your chances for cancer. What advice do you have for women in this space?
Yeah, I think it's an individual response. Unfortunately, like we said, we try to say generically, we must exercise, we must eat right, we must do this. But like we're talking about, someone who gets Alzheimer's disease at age 50 versus someone who's 85, there's something different about them. So if someone has a family history of breast cancer or other types of cancer that we're worried about estrogen increasing that risk, then that might be a different sort of conversation in terms of risk benefit versus cognitive health for someone else who says, well, I don't have that history, but we know that the data is now showing that being on hormone replacement therapy perimenopausal might be neuroprotective versus
Repeat that. Repeat, that's big.
So to be on hormone replacement therapy perimenopausal time can be neuroprotective in terms of cognitive health versus being postmenopausal and then taking the hormone replacement therapy. It's been sort of controversial over the past several years because I don't think it's been studied as well. So, and it's always retrospective too. So we need a good prospective study to understand that better, but the evidence is now suggesting that perimenopausal time being on hormone replacement therapy can be beneficial.
We're also seeing a lot of kind of the American Western diet, very bad for the brain, right? The way people are working at desks. You have an organization called Sitting Matters, right? The actual lifestyle, our work style in this country is actually really detrimental to the brain. So what do people do that are sitting at a desk, that are in a startup, that are being asked to work 24/7 on email, who are stressed out? What suggestion do you have for them?
To sit. Sitting does matter. So what I think is important to mention with some of the research that I have been doing and also in my practice is that so we use meditation to treat different things like anxiety and depression, but it also can be used to prevent health-related things. And so I think even if it's just taking a moment out of your day, something that's very ritualistic, like brushing your teeth or getting coffee, like just taking 3 minutes, 5 minutes in the morning. You can also take that space anytime you enter into a new space. So even just being thoughtful and conscious of the way that you're transitioning from one thing to the next thing is a way of being mindful. And the reason why mindfulness, which is around the idea of being present, is so important to this mitigation of stress and anxiety is because when you're present, you really are only with what is happening in that moment versus when we're anxious, we're either worried about something that may or may not happen or something that has already happened that we're kind of reliving over and over again. And that's catastrophizing and horrible and kind of not helpful. So if we can find ways to just be with what is happening, whether it's I can feel my heart beating or I can feel my breath going in and out of my body. Like those are very simple ways that we can be mindful and practice mindfulness.
And what we've also found is that people can go to, if they're in a corporation, ask for meditation space. A lot of corporations, I just did a story on Mark Benioff here at Salesforce, has meditation rooms on every floor. And that's not just in California. That's something that different companies are implementing because they understand that people are stressed out. Talk to your company about, preventative health. Talk to your company about sitting, standing desk, all of these things that we're now learning that are good for the brain. So I want to open this up to questions. We have a microphone. These people don't come together all the time. So if you have any questions, particularly about the Bredesen protocol, if you have a loved one dealing with cognitive impairment or yourself, trying to understand whether it's a sleep issue, it's a supplement, Dale. So does anybody have any question? Dale, can you talk about supplements as we find someone to have a question? So many people come up to me and say, do I take DHA? Do I take vitamin D? Do I take estrogen? Do I take testosterone? What do I take? There's so many, people lay out supplements, and I know you're a big believer in that.
Yeah, so please remember that supplements are by definition supplementary, right? So a lot of people come to us and say, just tell me what supplements to take, and that's not the way this works. So the idea is we are driving you toward a biochemistry that supports your brain. And as we understand what that is better and better, we understand that, for example, most people do best with an organic, plant-based, ketogenic diet, with appropriate sleep, with a lack of sleep apnea. And I don't know how many people have been checked for sleep apnea, but we find it all the time. 70%, it's exactly what Sharon was talking about earlier. 70% of people with sleep apnea go undiagnosed during their lifetimes. So supplements are helpful if your biochemistry needs them. If your vitamin D is 18 or 19 or 21, you want to push it up. If you have a suboptimal homocysteine, you want to bring it down. If you have a suboptimal B12 or vitamin D or vitamin E, these things turn out to be important. When I was in medical school, there was only one course on nutrition, and it was optional. You didn't have to take it. That's how bad it was back in the late 70s. So we now know these things are absolutely critical and no surprise, part of your being able to make synapses, to make memories, to keep them, to have a functional brain is to have an optimal biochemistry. And so absolutely. So it's not supplements for supplements' sake, but it's supplements to drive you to an optimal neurochemistry.
So people understanding that if they're having some cognitive issues, it could be sleep. It could be a vitamin deficiency, right? So go ahead, question.
Yes, thank you, Maria and panelists. I do have a question about sleep, which is one of the things that, how does sleep work into this? Because I come from a long line of bad sleepers. And one of the things I'd read was, and of course made me anxious, was that, that if you don't get good sleep, it could lead to Alzheimer's. So could you please address the issue of sleep, and how does falling asleep in front of the TV affect your brain in that regard as well? Thank you.
So certainly suboptimal to fall asleep. You want to have good sleep hygiene. And there's a wonderful book that just came out from Professor Walker that's called Why We Sleep, and I recommend it highly. I would check that out. Have you been checked for sleep apnea? That's a common thing. And then there's another related thing, which actually isn't often caught on the sleep apnea studies, which is called upper airway resistance syndrome, URS. And what this leads to is basically you're secreting in small amounts adrenaline throughout the night. You're responding to this lack of perfect sleep, basically, lack of perfect ability to take in the oxygen that you need. And this is turning out to be important in a number of scenarios. So yeah, please check the book out and check out your sleep.
Yeah. Go ahead, Chair.
So what I say to my patients about how important sleep is, obviously if you have a bad night's sleep, then you can't concentrate the next day. So you can imagine consistent poor sleep just from your sleep hygiene or whatever reason, then you're not able to concentrate. When we're sleeping, we're also consolidating memories from that day too. Then you add to that potentially sleep apnea, where your brain is not getting oxygen that it needs. And so how can the brain function? And then we add to that to the research that mouse models and human studies in which people have slept longer than 6 hours versus less than 6 hours, there's people who slept more had less of this bad amyloid protein that we see in Alzheimer's disease build up. So maybe something happens while we're sleeping that's helping get rid of that too. So there's so many reasons why sleep is important.
So many people who struggle with sleep, particularly women in their middle ages, but people who are stressed out struggle with sleep. So then guess what? They take Ambien.
Right,
They take all sorts of other things. And what is the
sleep
effect
architecture
of that?
changes as we get older, number one, and with dementia syndromes and other neurodegenerative syndromes. So it's very easy to go over the counter and buy an anticholinergic medication like Benadryl, Ambien, which is a benzodiazepine. Benzodiazepines are great for sort of emergency situations. It's like having some alcohol. Calms you down, but it's not good for the brain. So what do we say? Well, if you have sleep problems, talk to your doctor about what might be a good prescription medication that doesn't adversely affect cognitive health. And if it's an anxiety problem causing sleep issues, then maybe treating with an anxiety medication plus mindfulness too, right? I would recommend that because it's all intertwined. It's not just one perfect result.
Maria, if I could just share really quickly on that, it's if we're looking at the caregiver generation, one of the things that we're seeing lack of sleep due to caregiving causing is $50 billion of lost productivity in the US economy because people are going to work without the full mental state that they need. And so that's why this is not a niche issue for the people who are doing the caregiving. This is why Maria has catalyzed a national conversation. It's affecting society at all levels.
Great, thank you.
This on? Oh. My name's Linda, and we're dealing with early onset Alzheimer's. My husband, Dennis, 8 years in. I appreciated your book and heard you speak, talked about the 3 different kinds, but what it didn't say is many of us are dealing with parents and loved ones who have Alzheimer's. At what stage is it possible to do some of the things you talk about in diet, and at what stage is it really too late?
Yeah, that's a great question, and this comes up all the time. And as you might imagine, the earlier the better. So prevention is the best. And then what's called SCI, subjective cognitive impairment, we see virtually all these people improve. We see most of the people with MCI improve. and we see some of the people who have Alzheimer's disease improve. We do have examples of people who had a MoCA score of 0, so they were very late, improve, but that's the exception, not the rule. There's a lot more to be done, and so what we want to do to reduce the global burden of dementia is to get people to come in as early as possible. So what I recommend for people who are in the late stages is that all of their offspring come in and see if they should be on prevention.
Yeah, but you have like 15,000 people on your waiting list, so like,
Not,
I mean, seriously. I mean, people tell me all the time, can you get me into Dale Bredesen? It's 15,000 people on the waiting list. So, I mean, you can buy the book, but how do we kind of deal with all the people?
So you brought up a really good point. So we have produced a network. So we have over 1,000 trained physicians in 10 different countries and all over the U.S. So there shouldn't be so many on the waiting list, and the waiting should be relatively short. We have people who are coming in, and there are physicians in the Bay Area as well as all over California. So you should be able to see people who, and of course, there are national centers like UCSF and Stanford and places like that as well.
Can I say also?
Yeah.
Sorry. I think everyone's here because they really want to help make Alzheimer's and women Alzheimer's improve, whether it's finding a cure, treating yourself, a family member. So you've already done a lot by being here today, but participating in research so we can understand the differences. We've only started to learn a little bit more about how women are different than men in getting Alzheimer's disease, but we need more people to participate, whether it's research at UCSF, Stanford, anywhere else, whether it's clinical trials to find the cure, or volunteering yourself or family members to understand this disease, and so why the gut might be important or why it's less important for you, for that individual, whether it's sleep, whether it's something else. I think everyone's studying different things.
And we're trying to get people who are in their 30s, their 40s, their 50s to participate in trials, and I say that it's a national service. So if you work for a company, I'm trying to reach out to companies to ask, to say, would you allow people to take paid time off to participate in a trial?
This is amazing. I read that about you. This is so
Yeah.
fantastic.
Well, can you
because
help me? Because like
I would, yes, bring me
Yeah.
along. I'll go on your tour. But I think, I run all the
Seriously.
clinical trials at Stanford, and I want to really broaden the scope. And I think one thing you had said is that when is it too late? And unfortunately, a lot of times pharmaceutical companies and researchers say maybe there's a point when it's too late to intervene. So a lot of the trend now is to recruit people, participants, not just patients, who are in earlier and earlier stages. One of the studies that I'm running is a prevention trial. And most of the trials are targeting people who have mild cognitive impairment. But I want to expand that scope so we have people for later stages as well, but we need people to participate. We need funds. We need people to really believe in it and offer those treatments too, and taking the time. A lot of times people say, well, I want my husband, my father, my mother, my sister to participate, but I'm working, especially for young onset patients. So how do we do that? I think getting partnerships with companies to offer that time.
It is a national service, so just FYI if you're in a company.
I think it's my
Do it.
turn. My name is Pam Montana, and as everyone that was working out with me today knows, I am living with younger onset Alzheimer's. And my question is, I know there's a lot of hope, and I know there's a lot going on, and I'm part of that, and I'm in a clinical trial with this amazing woman right here at UCSF. But I'm getting a sense that a lot of what we're doing is to come up with a preventative for folks that don't have it, and not for someone like me that does have it. And so my question is, again, similar, is there a chance in the next 10 years that something could cure me versus somebody that doesn't have it, and so it would be preventative? Because I have hope and I believe and all that, but I'm really kind of just doing everything I can while I can, because I honestly don't think there will be a cure in my lifetime.
Well, I think you have to be very careful about using the term cure, but what you want to do is to improve your cognition. So we published the first examples of reversal of cognitive decline back in 2014. We published additional patients in 2016. We're now publishing
That
an
was
additional...
a very small study, though,
Yeah,
right?
and we're
Yeah.
publishing an additional 50 now. We have now over 2,000 patients who are on the protocol. And it's no question, it goes against the classical idea of a monotherapy, of a typical drug, because that's what the biochemistry drove us to. So there is a difference of opinion now among my colleagues and myself about the way that you should go after this disease. So no, we absolutely are not just dealing with prevention. We deal with many people who already have cognitive decline.
And you can talk to Dale. Dale has his best-selling book, as do others here. So you can talk to him afterwards. Go. Yeah.
My mother just died of dementia last July. When she first had her symptoms, we took her to 4 different neurologists and got 4 different opinions. One said Lewy body dementia, one said Parkinson's dementia, one said Alzheimer's, one said vascular dementia. When she died, we had an autopsy done and she had all 4 of them. I suspect this is happening a lot. So my question is, what we're doing, healing the leaky gut, all this other stuff, will be helpful for Alzheimer's, but I'm hoping that it will be helpful for all the other types of dementia too. And are they really all related, as far as we know?
Wow. Wow. Go ahead.
So one of the things in our Alzheimer's
Is that
disease,
common? You are nodding your head.
I'm nodding my head because there's definitely certain types of diseases that overlap more than others. Lewy body disease and Alzheimer's disease. So for those of you who don't know what Lewy body disease, it's related to Parkinson's disease. There's a protein called alpha-synuclein that builds up in the brain. These form that's what's called Lewy bodies. And pathologically, the neuropathologist cannot tell the difference between Lewy body disease and Parkinson's disease dementia. So they're very similar. And for some reason, people who have Alzheimer's disease often can develop Lewy body disease and vice versa. So they co-occur very often. So does vascular dementia. So these things that we can try to control, like reducing our vascular risk factors, high blood pressure, diabetes, et cetera, high cholesterol, those things can help prevent or slow the progression of vascular dementia. But we need to understand it better. So at Stanford, we have an Alzheimer's Disease Research Center, so does UCSF and several other centers that try to understand this. We specialize in understanding Parkinson's disease, Lewy body disease, Alzheimer's disease, and the overlap between them so we can understand it and see what we can do to implement it. I serve as co-director of the Lewy Body Center of Excellence at Stanford also because we want to implement clinical trials. There are very few clinical trials for Lewy body disease, and it's a very nuanced disease because not only are there hallucinations that are less common in Alzheimer's disease that happens early on, there's the Parkinsonism, the movement aspect, as well as fluctuations in attention and alertness that really plays into the sleep aspect a lot more in Lewy body disease. So we're understanding, but we still need to understand the interplay. So if we don't have the right diagnosis, we can't give you the right treatment too.
And so all of these, can you address what she's saying also? Because all of the brain begins changing at the age of 30, right?
Sure.
So all of these things are developing with time, and we're all living longer, and everybody wants to live longer, but they want to live longer like they're 30.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. So we want the health span and we want the sharp span, right? We want to be sharp for many, many years. And I think that is achievable with what we're beginning to understand about what it takes. It's not a surprise, perhaps, that it takes the appropriate things to support. And the fact of the matter is, we are living in a situation with too much stress, with too much anxiety. We're living in places that have too much pollution. You probably saw just a few months ago the work coming out in pollution and its risk for cognitive decline. So what you described, just as Sharon said, is relatively common. It's fairly common to see Lewy body pathology. About 40 to 45% of autopsies with Alzheimer's show Lewy bodies as well. So this is telling us that the processes that are producing this are similar. And the other thing it's telling us that's very important is that what we're finding about the amyloid of Alzheimer's is that it is a protective response. We've been labeling amyloid the bad guy and spending billions of dollars in pharmaceutical companies to get rid of the amyloid. But guess what? Amyloid is an antimicrobial. It also binds specific toxins. So it is a response. It's a mediator. It's not a cause in the vast majority of people. So the insults, the various things from insulin resistance to exposure to chronic pathogens to all these things are causing your brain to make responses that include amyloid and include alpha-synuclein.
Do you think it's the American lifestyle, the work, the air we breathe, the makeup we put on our face, which is why I'm glad Beauty Counter is one of our sponsors because they're doing clean makeup, and that's a big thing that my daughter is always in my room taking all my makeup out because she said, we don't know, is this bad for your brain, and changing all the cleaning products in our house because she thinks it's bad for the brain.
Let me tell you something, Maria. I do not wear makeup. Okay, so that's...
No, but this is a big thing, with, kind of our lifestyle, what we eat, how we work, how we stress, what we put on our face, what we put in our house, the air we breathe.
So this is what the epidemiologists have been telling us, that guess what? If you live in a polluted area, you are at greater risk for cognitive decline. And guess what? If you get exposed to specific toxins, if you have too much stress, if you have, cortisol itself is associated with shrinkage of your hippocampus. So all of these things are contributors. And again, that's why our research over the years suggested that this is not something where there's one cause. It's something where there are many contributors, and we can address those contributors. And sure, we hope that one day there will be a single pill that will do everything. But for now, the idea is whatever the pill that you're taking, do it on the backbone of a program that addresses the very things that are contributing this. We have tried to treat this disease without asking what's causing it. We keep saying, let's get a cure, let's get a cure. We really need to address all the things that are contributing to it.
Question?
Hi, my name is Devin. Thank you guys for the insights you provided today. It's been really wonderful. I imagine for the success of this movement, it's going to require advances in science, but it will also require big advances in narratives and stories that we tell ourselves. Could you speak to the gaps that are needed in the advancement of the stories that we tell ourselves, both as individuals and a society, that can contribute to the success of this movement?
I'm so glad you asked that. So I spent yesterday with Lee Hood and his group. You probably know Lee is the one who invented the DNA sequencers that powered the human genome. He won the National Medal of Science from President Obama a few years ago. And we are working with his group actively now because the whole idea is we have a complexity gap. Human beings are incredibly complex organisms, as we all know, and yet we've been trying to deal with human beings in the clinic getting very small data sets. We ask what your sodium, your potassium, a few other things, and then we say, you've got this thing called Alzheimer's. We don't know why you have it, but there's nothing we can do about it. So 21st century medicine is about asking why instead of asking what it is. And so you will see more and more and larger data sets and machine learning and things like this to determine all of the things, and having all doctors should have computer-based algorithms in their offices.
We're going to wrap this up, and as I said, everybody will be here. You can ask them questions, but I want to ask each person to leave the audience here with one useful piece of information that could be life-changing when they go out of here. Lily?
Your genes are not your destiny, and there is never any shame in asking for help when you are caring for an aging loved one.
Great.
There is a tremendous amount of hope, more than there ever has been before. You are in charge, so it is actionable, get checked, and do the best you can for prevention. Get a cognoscopy. I know you don't like that term.
I take a cognitive test, yeah.
Yes. Find out where you stand and get on optimal prevention.
And also understand if Alzheimer's runs in your family, that doesn't mean you're going to get it. And if it doesn't run in your family, that doesn't mean you're free. So everybody's got a brain. Everybody's vulnerable. Every 65 seconds, know these numbers. Take control of your brain and its health. Next,
Use your
Sharon.
brain to protect your brain.
Use your brain to protect your brain. Okay.
I always tell my patients to make healthy living part of their lifestyle. If we don't make every day a choice to be healthy and treating our brain, then we're not going to expect it to work as well as we want to as we get older. So I think that's important. And my second point, I know you said one, is to really volunteer for research. Wherever you might be, this will really help expand and advance the science to understand why women are more affected, why people are affected at younger ages, and why there's 2 diseases that people might get.
Great.
And I have 2 points as well. The first one is that the body doesn't lie. And the second one is that meditation does change your brain and your body.
I want to thank you all so much for coming here today. Thank you for joining us, and thank you so much. Now you can go eat.
Thank you, Maria.